All right, good evening, protectors, and welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. You have Coach Dustin. Sorry, Coach Dustin is away this week. We have Coach Brad and myself here tonight. So, Brad, thanks for being here. Okay, listen, we're going to cut to our intro. We're going to come back in 30 seconds, and tonight we're going to talk about how experience can get you killed. Okay, this is something that I unfortunately have some experience with firsthand. So we're going to talk about this experience, but it's a very powerful thing, and it runs contrary to what a lot of people think. So stick with us. We're going to have a great conversation. How experience can get you killed. Back in 30 seconds. Hey everybody, for those of you that don't know me, my name is Greg LeBuff, and I'm sharing insights for how I went from the victim of a brutal attempted murder to weaponizing my mind and body, mastering the tool of violence so that I can protect myself and my family from violent criminal assault, and how for the past 30 years, I've been helping good people just like you do the same. Welcome to the Education of a Weaponized Man podcast. Okay, we're back, and like I said, before we cut the intro, that we're going to talk about how experience can get you killed, and I said that I have experience with how experience can get you killed. But let's set up a little bit of a framework just so that people can follow along here. Experience. Now, most of us, and I'll see whether you agree with this or not, Brad, but most people understand the value of experience, right? When you have experience, that means you have line familiarization. It's reasonable to assume that with experience is going to come a certain amount of capability, right? So if you have exposure to something, you have experience with something, stands to reason that even if you have failed, you're going to learn from those failures and you're going to develop a certain amount of capability. So experience is often something that we seek, and that is 100% true, and I agree with that. Matter of fact, I just had a conversation tonight with somebody where we were talking about what actually is one of the main ingredients for real world confidence. And I will always argue that experience, not capability, is one of the primary ingredients, because if you've done something, 100 times, if you've done something 1,000 times, you've done it successfully, then you know how to do it. And when you know how to do it, it's nothing special. It becomes effortless. It becomes almost commonplace, and you do it with the absolute certainty. And that is and you get the result that you set out to get, because you're like, I've done this 100 times. I've just done it too many times. I know what to do. That's experience, right? Because none of us have stress, none of us worry, none of us anxiety with the things that we do all the time. I mean, imagine there was a point in time in my life where I was nervous about having to go to school and tie my shoes in gym for the first time. I was beyond the age of Velcro slip-ons, and I'm like, I'm kind of nervous about this shit. Why? Because I didn't know how to tie my shoes. I don't remember the last time I was nervous about tying my shoes, right? So stupid, silly analogy, but that's the point. Experience. Experience gives you certainty, and the certainty gives you confidence, right? And it's actionable confidence. So, let me just get some of your visceral thoughts, Brad, on experience and the role that you see it playing in your life or in training.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think about which is the best way to talk about it, because I have one thing that I don't know, maybe I could bring it up later. I'll just bring it up now. It's when you ask the question on experience and is how it could get you killed, it made me kind of just reflect and be like, okay, well, what is it? So the visual response for me is that, yes, people are seeking experiences, but we have to really identify and understand what those experiences are teaching us, and not to get confused from experience in one area, one situation, and trying to use that exact same experience, knowledge, on something that is completely different, right? So I think that's where, for me, is where people are really going to get caught in that trap, thinking that they have experience in one thing because it may look the same, but it's different,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, 100%. And that is exactly how we're going to, the conversation that I want to, peel or dive into, and those are the layers that I want to peel back. Let's just start it this way. There's two ways to look at this, right? When people come to us for training, I prefer to work with people that have no experience. That is by far my preference. Matter of fact, 30 plus men, 30 years of age and older, okay, no experience. Those are some of my two biggest criteria that I prefer. Now, does that mean that we don't work with people that are under the age of 30? No. Does it mean that we don't work with people that have some experience? I prefer not to work with people that have experience. Okay, and here's the reason why I pause on that. Right? Will I do it? I prefer not to do that. I'm not going to state whether I will or won't, but people either have a paradigm or they have a bias. And that's exactly what you were alluding to when it comes to experience. You see, we are all, from the moment of our birth, especially up to about the age of 5, we're an empty vessel. Means the cognitive part of our brain has not developed to the point yet where we can accept or reject whatever the sensory faculties are picking up, whatever we're seeing, hearing, feeling, touching, or smelling. That means that we are a completely open vessel. And so we are the byproduct of, the experiences, the sights, the sounds, the smells, the feel of the people that are closest to us, right? We are inheriting their paradigms, which is their values, their beliefs. And remember, these things, for the most part, many of them are unwanted. We don't get a choice. We don't accept or reject, right? Because the conscious brain is not there. And so it is the subconscious brain that is wide open, and it cannot reject anything. Whatever is impressed enough into the subconscious becomes our truth. It becomes a paradigm. So we are all, up to a certain point or age, a collection of inherited values, beliefs, and perceptions of the world that were given to us by the people that were around us. The books we read, the news reports that were on in the back, all that shit, right? I think most people get that. So there's paradigms. Now, when you talk about, protecting yourself, and you have, let's say, a man that is 30 years older or plus, and so he's lived life, but he's like, listen, I've never really been in a violent assault. I've never been in a fight, really. Yeah, there's always little bits of confrontation and stuff. I've never done martial arts. I've never explored it. I've just never done any of this stuff. Then yes, you have a man that has paradigms, right? Which means that he has opinions, he has beliefs, and he has certain levels of convictions on things. So he has an opinion of it. What does fighting mean to you? How do you think you defend yourself? He has these paradigms of what he believes. He's seen it in movies and on TV and all this kind of stuff. But those paradigms are much easier to break down because they are typically not ingrained to the level of a conviction. Like where they just have so many legs underneath the table, it is so stabilized that they're willing to fucking die for the belief. Okay, so a paradigm is a much easier thing to shift. But when you have people, and especially if they did it at a younger age, so 18, 19, 20, 10 years old, 12, whatever, so they get into combat sport, they get into martial arts, they get into the disciplines of fighting, whether it's judo or jiu-jitsu or whatever it is, and they've taken that for any length of time in their formative years, or even as a younger adult when they're in the testosterone years, right? They're in their mid-20s or late 20s, maybe early 30s even, and they have been now trained. What develops is a bias. And so they now can only, or it's much easier for them to view something through the lens by which they were taught to look at it. So a boxer sees it through the lens of boxing, a jiu-jitsu through jiu-jitsu. You know what I mean? And of course you know what I mean. But what people don't understand though is that these become a bias. And not all biases are bad, and we all have biases, we all have the paradigms, but a bias is different than a paradigm. For this analogy, a bias is oftentimes far more reinforced, right? Because typically, again, especially a bias of somebody that's started 18, 19, 20, 23, whatever it is, they get into it and their instructor, their authority figure, they're telling them it's this, they're practicing, they're training, they're supported by other people that are doing the same thing. They're witnessing competition events or sporting events or tournaments or interclub sparring sessions, all that type of stuff, where they're seeing this over and over and over again, and it's constantly being reinforced. So this becomes the bias, because then all of a sudden, too, you develop a certain amount of skill. Like you're like, hey, listen, I'm actually a pretty good boxer, or I'm not a great boxer, but I got a great jab, or I got a great hook combination, or I got a great lead leg roundhouse, or whatever it is. Now we have a personal preference that contributes to the bias, because we're going, well, we're good at this. Our self-image links to the bias. Oh, I'm a part of this group. What a bunch of great guys and helped me through a lot of hard times in my life. And so there's this loyalty. Again, there's different levels and different layers of a bias that can form. And of course, once that happens, it becomes infinitely harder to break down a bias because people become protective about a bias. A paradigm, people aren't always protective about a paradigm because they just like, oh, this is the way I believe the world to be. This is the truth, right? And then someone shows you something different, like, oh, well, in that front, I mean, I don't really know, I guess, and I didn't really care. I kind of grew up always thinking or believing this because that's kind of what my parents did. But yeah, that makes total fucking sense. So whereas a bias again has been more deeply ingrained. So that's and I don't know if you want to throw something else in it to help clarify that a bit or to reinforce that, but that is exactly what you were talking about how experience can become our trap because it becomes a bias versus just a paradigm.
Yeah, of course, for sure. I agree with that.
Okay, so what I would say, and let me, I guess, because and then you can share, because we have contrasting origins. I started in martial arts at a young age, right? And again, even when I started in martial arts at 9 years old, whatever, 10 years old, I wanted to learn to defend myself. Now, of course, what it meant to me as a 10-year-old is different than what it means to me today, obviously, but I had as a young man, I had an awareness of bullies, that type, like, I had an awareness that there would be moments, the potential for moments where other boys, young men, could and would try to target me. And I had a fear of that. So I wanted to learn to defend myself. I remember very clearly at a young age, that was my motivating factor. And then, so I was drawn to, and the thing that appealed to me was a street, supposed, kind of karate style. And it was karate / kickboxing. So I was like, yeah, that's what I wanted. So I took it for those reasons. And then, of course, the story, then I ended up, seeing Thai boxing, Muay Thai, and pro boxers and being like, this is a whole different thing. These guys are the real deal. And then I shifted and went into that and got to be a sparring partner for professional fighters and all this kind of stuff. My point is that became my bias because I did it from the age of 9 or 10 all the way through, those teen years up until, my like 20, 21-ish, 19, 20, I was doing that. And at the end of that, so through those, 17, 18, 19, 20-ish year olds, young man, very formative development happening. That was when I was around and inundated with the professional boxer work ethic and their thoughts, their beliefs, their training methodologies, all that stuff. So what I'm getting at is that then when I got into my violent assault, of course, my paradigms, my bias for what it was to be able to defend yourself, that is what I worked from. Like that is how I tried to use it. Right? Clearly, because that was my paradigms, meaning I had the belief that this stuff worked. That's why I was doing it. It was the best stuff around, most combative stuff around, most realistic stuff around. But then I also had the bias. And one thing that's interesting is during the violent assault, even when my training had failed me, there was multiple opportunities to abandon the training and just out of desperation of self-preservation, do something fucking different, right? Like you think, geez, if you're being bottled in the face and beaten and stomped and everything else, and what you're trying isn't working, maybe try something different, right? But it is the bias that prevented me from going outside and doing something unconventional, right? And that's the part that I want to get. That's where a bias can end up getting you killed. Because unwittingly, jump in. Sorry, what was that?
You're almost married to the bias. You can't divorce yourself because you're so committed to it. It's so ingrained in you. Even like in your situation where you're talking about, like, you have multiple times where I could have had the opportunity to shift what I was attempting and trying to do to defend myself, to do something completely different, but I couldn't because, again, like, you're just so married and committed to that. And say, well, this has to work.
Yeah.
And I say, well, what the fuck is it? It's not working.
Yeah.
Why is it not working? This has to work. you know, and it's just like, it's almost like you get that hamster in that wheel, it just keeps going and going and going. And it's like, you just keep trying and trying and trying. You're like, fuck, this is insanity.
Yeah, 100%. And matter of fact, I remember when I started weaponizing, I remember Paul saying, one of my instructors saying to me, do you know who the most dangerous person in the world to fight is? Somebody with absolutely no experience who's in great shape. And I remember always thinking, like, really? Like, aren't there like super like deadly high level trained people out there? Yeah, but you know who the most dangerous person to fight is? Somebody who knows absolutely fucking nothing. They have no training and they're in great fucking shape. Here's why. One, their gas tank is going to be deep. You're going to have to endure before they run out of gas, right? So because they just got fucking great conditioning. And the second part, no experience means they have no boundaries. They have no bias. They will do anything. They will, in the middle of something, just look and go, fuck, look at that rock. Hey, would that be a good idea to smash him on the fucking head? Or to bite this guy, or to do this, or do that? They have no constraints. They have no bias to rein them in. And what you just said is 100% right. This is not a conscious thing that happens, but in the moment under pressure, I had to live or die by my bias. Because I couldn't divorce it fast enough, right? Because I'd been conditioned beyond just a paradigm. You could have a paradigm and then have an experience, and that shatters that paradigm. So as I'm sitting there and you're being violently assaulted in mass attack in a fucking predatory blitz, which is unlike anything I'd ever seen in movies or on TV or in the rings or the competition or the dojos, you know, all that shit. If a paradigm could have been like, well, fuck. Look what are these guys doing? They're fighting dirty. They're cheating. They're ambushing. They're just stuff. Fuck that shit. I'm doing that. You know, you could see where somebody with no experience could go, this seems like a good idea. It's clearly working on me. Fuck it, I'm going to do that. But when you had the bias, my brain, my conditioning, my identity, everything was linked to, married to the fact that, like, keep trying to get the jab going, keep trying to get the combinations going, keep trying to get the kicks going, keep trying, you know, and it's like, you're not even in a position where you can do that. You got 8 guys on top of you stomping your head and boot fucking you, like, get the jab going, like, you know what I mean? And then the only thing that comes in, well, this is not fair. You dirty fucking bastards. If I fought you one-on-one, I'd kick the shit out of all of you. Like, then you're biased. Because again, we have to support our biases.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that part becomes clear, but and you know this part. Well, actually, no. Let me state my half first, because then it brings more contrast to yours very quickly. But when I first started training in the weaponizing, when I first met, you know, the guys that were teaching the Navy SEALs at the time, and I was blessed enough to start working with them privately. I've said this before. The first 2 to 3 years of my training, yes, they were teaching me. Yes, things that concepts, strategy, tactics, and tools I'd never seen before. I mean, they were building those skills, but it was almost an underlying growth. The main primary thing that was happening was they were breaking down my bias. They had to reprogram my bias. They had to knock legs off these tables of all the beliefs and the perceptions and the values and the way. I mean, it was, to me, I always say it's like you're part of a cult. And imagine, you know, the work that has to be done when somebody is removed from the cult to deprogram them. Because a bias is programming, and not all biases are bad, and you know, but the idea is that a bias has its limitations. So they had to deprogram me. And that took 3 to 3.5, maybe 4 years. Like, I mean, yes, progress was made. It wasn't like there was no progress, nothing changed for 3 to 4 years. Yes, progress was made, but it was a slow thing. Anytime that I was under pressure, anytime that they upped the stress level, I would revert back to a bias. I would revert back to a style. I'd revert back to, again, what was my safe place based off my experience. Sorry, yes?
I was going to ask, like, that first moment where, you know, you were under pressure, whatever the training grounds happened to be, where you didn't revert back to the old bias of doing it, and you did what you have been conditioning to do. You're like, oh, probably shit. That was awesome. I didn't do this. I've evolved past that bias. Right?
It's really cool that you brought that up, because, and this will make sense to a lot of people because I think we've all experienced something similar to this. I remember that. I remember the moment, because when I did it, I didn't recognize that I did it. it was under pressure, moving the spine, and I did something, and I remember this, and this, I'm like, what the fuck? Like, so much so that everybody stopped when that's not what you should be doing, but like kind of stopped, like, what the fuck is happening? And I remember my two instructors being like, well, look, who the fuck is this guy? Like, holy, what happened to you? Like, they made a big production over, and I was like, remember thinking like, what the fuck are you guys talking about? And it's like, oh, you didn't drop back into your fucking kickboxing stance. You didn't bounce your leg up and down every quarter of a second like every good Thai boxer does. Like, it was like you didn't do this shit. You zoned, you moved. Like, who the fuck is this guy? And I remember being like, oh, like, yeah, like, okay, now I have a new, and here's the thing, people say, oh, so you just formed a new bias. This is where the training is very, very cool. And I'm not going to talk about this fully yet, but no, they trained me in a way where I didn't replace one bias for another bias. They showed me they deprogrammed a bias out of me and showed me how to have, I'll say fluid beliefs, right? How to see it for what it was and how to be able to adapt and change as the environment dictated, right? So they did not program in another bias. And that's something that we're very careful with people. We do not program a bias into people, which is why we don't refer to what we do as a style. We don't teach people a style. We don't teach people a methodology of fighting. We are not an institution like that. As we say, oh, what kind of arts do you do? What martial arts do you do? No, we are not institutionalized like that, because the second you bring that on, you invite bias. And we cannot have bias. In combat, you need to be an impartial observer of violence so that you can accurately take the pulse of, read the operational environment, the mission demands of violent criminal predators, and you are free, unrestricted, to go wherever you need to go, to adapt whatever you need to adapt, to absorb what is useful, reject what is useless, and add what essentially is your own, which is a direct kind of Bruce Lee kind of quote. So anyways, that was my bias training, and the first years of my training was to break down the bias, which, man, I always look at that. I always remember feeling how much that set me back. Now, listen, I have a lot of good things that came from having the experiences that I had with martial arts. It's not like it was all 100% waste and everything else. Of course not. But the bias, I would have preferred to have gained some of that experience and knowledge and skill and understanding without having the bias been programmed into me. Then the attributes and all those, some of those things could have, would have been easier to carry forward. I could have started and just progressed in the 3-4 years versus having to be deprogrammed for 3 or 4 years before I could then springboard back up. At the end of the day, though, I also feel like I understand the process better because I went through the deprogramming. But anyway, so your experience was different because you didn't come into this with a bias, you came into it with paradigms. So maybe just from whatever part you want to start, but explain your journey, and maybe even, because we've had so many more in-depth conversations that my journey more intimately than I can express here, but maybe share your journey of it and maybe some of the contrasting differences that you have recognized between our two journeys and other guys that have come in, because you've a couple guys in particular that I know we'll think of that have come to us with experience and the struggles that we've had trying to deprogram their bias, or at least get them to recognize that they are operating from a bias which could get them killed. So I'll let you maybe explain some of that.
Yeah, like for me, starting on the weaponization process and journey was where I started.
Yeah.
I didn't have I knew that at a young age that it was important to me, but I also came from a small town and all they had was Taekwondo. They might have had karate or something like that. I had a friend that was in it, but there was just nothing and when I say young age, like my teenage years and stuff like that, I was like, I need something that's going to allow me to defend myself. And these tools, or what I have access to right now, I didn't see that they were the right solution and right fit for what I was looking for. So,
I don't want to interrupt you, but I just want to ask, because I think this is important. What did you base that off of? Was it just an intuitive feeling that you're or was it was there any one thing that you can think back on that did you have an experience? What gave you, because I think a lot of people, that's where they go. Like they see something, they're like, listen, I don't know if this is the greatest thing or not the greatest thing, but I have a feeling about it that it's not what I need. So where was that
Yeah.
at for you?
When it's hard for me to pinpoint the timeline, but there was a part of me where it's like, I don't believe that I could do that. I don't
Interesting.
believe that, like, what if I was going to be taught that? I don't believe that I'm going to be able to use those tools and skill sets to actually and effectively defend myself when people are trying to fucking kill me.
Mhm.
You know, like I didn't really have that conviction and thought like back then,
Yeah,
but I
yeah.
just like I didn't. So when I actually started looking, I did start looking at kickboxing because for me that was the closest representation at the time that I'm like, okay, so you're punching and you're kicking and it's this and that I was actually going to seek out.
Yeah.
But then I came across the weaponization process, and when I did, I was like, that I could do. That is something that I knew because it wasn't about weight classes. It wasn't about this. It was about effective strategies and tactics when you're outmanned and outgunned against superior firepower that you could use to defend yourself. So for me, that is where I was like, I'm all in. And not having biases, I would consider myself to be a blank slate because whatever I was told, I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. Perfect. Because you know more than I do, right? I'm coming to you for this education. So I'm not going to show up to somebody, ask for an education, and then constantly tell them, well, no, I'm just going to do this. It's like, no, I'm here because I don't have those biases. I'm not blank canvas. And as that's kind of developed on, and I've said this many, many times, I've said it in the podcasts, is that it is one of the things that I am most proud of that we do is we have no allegiance to anything. Our whole purpose is to weaponize people for violence. And if what we're doing is deems not to be the best thing based on everything that we understand, we will change that. If going back to boxing, tight boxing, professional boxing mechanics was the best thing for weaponizing against violence, we would do that 100% unapologetically. But unfortunately, or fortunately, it is what it is, but that's not the case. And I love that about what we do. And it gives me the certainty and conviction of action because I'm like, if there is something better based on our understanding, we will do it. And that's super, super powerful for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. There's a couple things you said that I want to pick up on because, and they led perfectly into each other. But one thing you said is that when you started, you felt you were a blank slate, which 100%, like that is the things you come in with paradigms, right? We all have these paradigms of what we believe it is, but we don't have this bias. We haven't had this programming, but, and you start off and saying, listen, well, I came here and two things. One is you looked at it and said, listen, I could see myself doing that. Why? Because it is clearly like it's not about a weight class, it's not about a competition, it's not about there's no rules, there's none of that filler is present.
The
And so
strategies made sense.
yeah, exactly. The strategies made sense where you're like, well, that seems because again, go back to what I said. Who's the most dangerous person to fight? Somebody that has great conditioning. They're not going to fucking run out of gas. So if you're just waiting for them to get tired, you're going to be better pack a fucking lunch. And the second part is they have no experience because they'll fucking do anything. And exactly what you're talking about, it's like the strategies made sense to somebody who goes, well, I don't have a lot of experience. That fucking makes sense. You're just standing up there teaching common sense, aren't you, motherfucker? And it's like, yeah, like, because we're creating scenarios and saying, listen, if you got a guy that outweighs you by 150 pounds, he's high on fucking PCP, and he actually knows how to punch and fucking kick. He grew up in a fucking bad neighborhood. He's been in out of fucking prisons. He's been in trouble with the fucking legal system. The police know who this motherfucker is. This ain't his first rodeo robbing, murdering, or raping people. Like you look at that, and you start saying, well, what the fuck? Then someone says, well, listen, if you looked at it, like, what are you going to do? Walk up there, put your hands up, spit in your hands, go, let's go, motherfucker, and start having a bare knuckle fight with this guy? Like, fuck that ain't good. If I said that to you, you're going to be like, that's insane. How the fuck am I going to win a bare knuckle match against this motherfucker? But I say, well, listen, how about a strategy of like a Trojan horse or this and this and this and this? And all of a sudden you're going, well, that just makes fucking sense. You are doing the same thing that a guy with no experience does. Just goes, what do I need to do to fucking survive? And you're like, well, think about this. But yeah, fuck, that makes sense. I could do that. That's that feeling, right? So that's what got you in. And then the other part was you talked about, like, and I totally agree with this, It's like, listen, I put my faith in you. What you said makes sense. And in the beginning, it is blind faith. Right? It's not fully blind, because when I did the demo, you saw the thing, you're like, listen, that makes sense. So there's a basis for why you had some faith, but you went all in. And in the beginning, that's the way it is, because it's the exact same way for me. Is I met them and I'd never heard anybody talk about violence that way. So part of my brain went, okay, I've just about got murdered doing it the other way. So you're not regurgitating the same shit that I've been hearing all these years, which you can't fool me. I know that shit don't work. Now this guy's saying something different and it makes fucking sense. And then it's like, okay, I'm gonna jump in with faith. Teach me, move me, get me there. And then what happens though is it very quickly stops becoming blind faith. And the reason I wanted to pick up on this is because if somebody was just to go, hey, listen, you're the man, you're the sensei, you're the guru, you're the teacher, tell me what I need to do and I'm going to do it. That'll lead you to a bias. And that is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is the fact that something made sense, jumped in, had some faith in the beginning to trust the process. Say, you've created results in yourself and other people have seen that. So I'm going to have some faith. And then as it goes forward, it's faith combined with understanding. That is the secret. Not blind faith. Blind faith is just, there's no understanding of why you have this. You're just going, I'm going to fucking have this because this is what I made a decision, and that becomes a bias. So it's faith combined with understanding. And through the process, you begin to understand something. And what you understand is that the entire weaponizing process for us, how we train without creating a bias in ourselves or our clients, is by constantly understanding that everything we do is predicated off of understanding the other person's objective. The other person, they have an objective. Somebody wants to murder you. Even if it's a spontaneous eruption, somebody loses control for whatever reason, you just happen to be the wrong place, the wrong time, there's an objective to what they want. And they're coming at you. And when you learn to read the objective, and your training is always about the objective of the person and attacking and destroying their objective, not fighting the man, then what happens is you have no bias because you constantly study from the way of objective, from the angle of objective. And it's easy to just go, that's what you just said. It's like, why don't we do boxing? There is no better punching system on the planet than boxing. And that is 100% true, because if there was, you'd get somebody who'd put some gloves on, get in the ring, and he would use that system against professional boxers, and he'd be a multi-millionaire and famous and everything else. And if you don't think that there's somebody that has that secret system that say, well, none of them want to be famous, none of them want to make money, none of, bullshit. Yeah. They would take, but they don't. So in a ring with all the confines of boxing and the rules and the regulations and the gear, how they're doing it is the best way to do it. Yep. Notice how it shifted. The second you got into an octagon with smaller gloves and the rules allowed clinching and takedowns and groundwork, they modify the boxing a bit. They still use some boxing, but it does not look like a pure boxing match. There's a difference. Okay? So what we want, though, is we have to look at the objective. And boxing doesn't destroy an objective. It's good for fighting the man. But the objective, if somebody bigger and stronger than me who's got better punches wants to punch me in the face, the last thing I'm going to do is agree to box him. I have to go, well, what's the objective he wants, and what is the most brutally efficient way to circumvent that? And that is not, people say, oh, you don't box a boxer, you kick a boxer. You don't kick a kicker, you box a kicker, you trap a kicker, you grapple a trapper. Like, they're always going to go to these different range things, but it's like, I said, what is the most brutally efficient way? Not just what is a way. So if somebody wants to punch and they're a better puncher, I'm not just going to go, well, I'm going to use my kicks. There's a much more effective ways, brutally efficient ways to circumvent that. I don't want to get too far off that, but I mean, just there's knife work, there's environment, there's angulation, there's geometric angles, there's environment, there's so many different ways that you can do that are far more effective, far more brutally efficient, take far less effort, far less training, far less skill, and it just have nothing to do with fighting man to man. Okay, but the idea is that do you have a bias, or do you have the ability to objectively see what these people want? And then look at it and say, how are criminals attacking? How are they successful? And then we predicate everything we do based off that. And the second objective change, what we do changes. And we've had changes over the years because things have evolved. And we have changed with those things. And so I have like you said, we have no loyalty to, again, somebody would say to me, what's the best weapon? What's the best punch? What's the best range? What's the best technique? What's the best, whatever it is, what's the best, what's the best, what's the best? And our answer to that is always going to be the same. Doesn't exist. There is no such thing as a superior weapon, range, style, technique, tactic, strategy. It does not exist. There is only the superior in that fraction of a second or in that moment in time because of the circumstances. Because what do they want? What is their objective? How are they going about executing on their objective? And then we have the luxury and the freedom to go, well, our training does not allow us to be stylized, ritualized, conditioned, or biased towards a favorite, or boxers. And you go to a seminar with a jiu-jitsu instructor, go to a seminar with a boxing instructor, go to a seminar with a taekwondo, judo, sambo, whatever, whatever you want, catch as catch can, whatever you want. What are they going to teach you? They're going to teach you some of the techniques from the art, and then they're going to teach you all of their favorite shit. Right? They're going to teach you all of their favorite stuff. They're going to say, here, let me show you my favorite combination. Let me show you this combination that works all the time. Let me show you this technique that I catch all these guys in. And it's like, yeah, okay, of course you're catching, and that becomes your bias. That becomes your favorite thing. And then people say, yeah, but it works. I went to a seminar, this guy taught me his favorite, way, how to take back control from cross side. And I pulled it off in 3-4 guys. I won the tournament and it was fucking awesome. Yeah, of course it works because you're fighting the man. But what happens when you get in a situation where you can't fight that man, where that won't work on that guy, or that's not the range to do it? And then it's like you have to be able to abandon and say, well, I have other techniques. Again, but all from within the bias. And that's a real hard thing for people to understand, is that if you don't train in violence, violence is always going to be outside of your social contract. Asocial violence is always going to be outside of your social contract. I mean, it's going to be outside of your paradigms. It's going to be outside of your bias. That's what the nature of violence is.
And it's a very dangerous place to bring your biases to.
100%. And even people that are doing so-called reality-based martial arts and stuff, that's why, again, it's like people that do Krav Maga, right? Say I do Krav. One of the things that pertains to the conversation is, oh, you do Krav. And the guy says, yeah, I do Jeet Kune Do. And the other guy says, I do, FMA, Filipino martial arts. I do jits, you know what I mean? I do jiu-jitsu. I do BJJ. I do whatever. Right from the very beginning of a conversation, you're stylized. I do Krav. And it's like, okay, so Krav has a certain way of doing things, a certain, a look to it, a feel to it. It's like you can identify people that do Krav Maga because there's a style to it. And then there is a bias to a style, a system, an instructor, a lineage, a whatever it is. And there's some good things that come from that, obviously, for community and tribe and all this kind of stuff and whatever. But we call what we do weaponizing. Weaponizing is a verb. It is not a style. It is not a, it is, it's an action. And again, that ties into the fact that we don't have a fucking bias. So weaponizing is whatever the fuck I need it to be to do whatever the fuck I need to do in whatever fucking horrific moment I'm facing to fucking survive. Period. That's what it is. That is a lot of freedom. And it's like most arts are constrained with it, even if they're like, oh, we do this, we do this, we do this. It's a culmination of 7 different martial arts that we've put together and this and that and stuff. The problem is often the bias is formed from the platform from which your thinking originates.
Well, it's even like we've talked about this in the past, where you have an individual that walks into whatever, and they are molded to operate again. It's they get created a bias, but it's like that technique. No, you have to do it this way. This is what it. You need to be able to do it perfectly and understanding it perfect to be able to get to the next level, belt, whatever. But it's like we're gonna take you as the individual and we're gonna mold you into this, right? And when you don't have the bias and you're worried about defending yourself and weaponizing against violence, you have somebody like, well, you can't do it this way, but you can do it this way, and you can achieve the same freaking result and outcome. So we're gonna set up the strategy, tactics, and tools in a manner that you could do it
Yeah.
because of maybe a limitation of whatever that happens to be.
Yeah.
So now it's like there's no bias there. It's taking somebody and allowing their natural ism and working with that as opposed to vice versa. You're almost taking it out of somebody.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it makes total sense, right? Like this is an oversimplification, but it's still an analogy that fits, right? But when all you have is a hammer, everything's a nail. And I don't want people, because again, people could look at that and say, well, if all you do is jujitsu, then you're going to try to jujitsu every situation. When sometimes, you know, jujitsu is not the best thing to do. It might even still work. I can put a screw into a board with a hammer, but it kind of defeats the purpose of it being a screw. You know what I mean? It's not a nail. So I mean, it can work. And then there are situations where it just flat out won't work. And what you find about the bias that you see how prevalent it is in everybody is because people will literally argue styles. They literally would just say jujitsu is the greatest thing. Like, oh, I take karate, whatever. Nah, like jujitsu, it's a lifestyle. It's this. It's everything. Like they're arguing for a brand.
And you're essentially arguing hardware.
Yeah. How dumb is it when you're talking about people's lives to even have to waste a second on a conversation that is about brand? Like not style, brand.
When you put it that way, it's yeah.
It's Coke versus Pepsi. It's like you're talking brand. Like you're not telling me, you're not explaining and sharing with me like the beauty of Alavanca and leverage and sensitivity. And some do, but they often the argument deteriorates to brand. Like
Yeah.
Alavanca, sensitivity exists in a lot of different arts. You know what I mean? And then is it less efficient, more efficient? Okay, well then you can discuss those things. But people are just, and that's the bias. People wear, like I've always said, like our logo on the hat, our logo on the sweaters, and Violence Never Asks and stuff. Like we wear a lot of gear that has our logo on it. But one of the things that I've done is the logo, like our logo, our flag for our community, our tribe, does not represent a company. We've been I've been very diligent and very clear on making sure that the logo is a representation of a way of being, right? Weaponizing. It's an action. It's a value system. It's a belief thing that is unrelated to a company, unrelated to a person. So the logo is not me. It's not my company. It's not our style. It's not our training methodology. It is symbolism for warriorship, symbolism for the right to defend life. And it has no loyalties, no allegiance, no branding to anything else. And that is often how we use the term weaponized. Is we use it like, I was watching my daughter play volleyball the other day, and her serves were fucking weaponized. Like it was like it's a description, like of being in state, in the zone of doing whatever the fuck you need to do. Like that play, you made that save, you had that dig. It was unconventional. It was like you were off balance. It was fucking dirty. It was fucking ugly. That was fucking weaponized. What you did out there, no volleyball instructor in the world is going to teach you that technique. But what you did saved that ball, that set this up, that set that up, that earned that point. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's the process. Like you get past the bias and the limitations that come, unfortunately, with a lot of training. Training at the end of the day is about getting better. And training for violence is about being able to survive. It's not about how you survive. You know what I mean? It's about surviving. And not just surviving, but fucking thriving. And being able to do whatever the fuck you need to do. Like at the end of the day, there is not going to be any judgment from any of us on what you did or didn't do. You know, well, that wasn't the right technique or that wasn't this. I have heard coaches tell their fighters, I would rather see you lose than fight with no style. Like, you know, than not use the, you know what I mean? Like you use our style, use our techniques, and otherwise, like, don't go out there and just start brawling, or don't go out there and start doing this or start doing that, because that's beneath us. Like, you know, use the system. You know, you get what I'm saying. Like, there's a loyalty to it.
Represent us.
Yeah, represent us, exactly.
Representing us than, you know, than going a different style or
Exactly.
bias and winning. It's like, yeah, but
Exactly.
you didn't do what we did.
You didn't do what we do. You weren't a great representation of who we are. And again, in sport, in competition, in tradition, in all those things, there's a place for that. I get that. But when it comes to defending your life, if that's the sole purpose, and you're telling people, listen, this is purely and solely about your self-preservation, then I don't see how a bias can exist. And if it does exist, it's a hindrance. Period.
Imagine, imagine if Paul or Tom told you that I'd rather see you die than to go outside of
Yeah.
this.
The
Whatever
Jeet Kune Do or
virtue
Filipino
force
martial arts or Jeet
you
Kune
know
Do
what I mean?
concepts or whatever. Yeah. What? Well, it's the
It's like,
same. It's the same silliness of, like, people were pissed at Dan Inosanto because when Bruce passed away, Dan Inosanto added Filipino martial arts and some Kali and stuff to Jeet Kune Do, and people were like, that's not Jeet Kune Do, and the original Jin Feng Kung Fu that Bruce left us, and the original this, and you should only be doing that, and you know, if you're a history major or you're into preserving history or whatever, maybe, but it was like a process that they used to develop efficient means of self-defense, and that process continued after his death because it's a process, not an art, not a style, all that kind of stuff, right? So again, often talked about being outside of bias. You know, nothing is more important than the man himself, all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? So 100% that this stuff, yeah, it's funny, right? When you bring brand and brand loyalty into self-defense, we have a problem. And so I'll just maybe wrap it back around here because we're probably coming to the end of this conversation. But I started it by just saying how experience can get you killed. You know, experience is one of the most powerful things you can have. You've been there, you've done that. That's where confidence comes from. You know, people like, you know, again, you work at heights, right? You know, you're a welder and you work, you know, I don't do anything that's not at least 10 to 15 stories off the ground. You know, and when you've done that every day for 10 years, you have that experience. You know, you've had some close calls, especially when you were learning, but when you had that experience, you wake up every day, you don't have the nerves. You have the proper amount of, you know, arousal, you know, the proper amount to make sure your safety shit is always checked out, but you get the fuck up there and you go to work and you know what the fuck you're doing. It's not like your first day on the job. So experience is a byproduct, or sorry, confidence is a byproduct of experience, and we all want that. What I'm saying is that oftentimes the experiences that we are being fed, the experiences that we are being subjected to, come with a cost, and that cost is the bias. To become part of an organization as a company, as a business owner, and my goal is, my passion is to weaponize more and more people to share this process with them. It is counterintuitive to weaponize people and introduce them and train them and build them through a process that does not simultaneously build brand loyalty. You know what I mean? A matter of fact, well, I don't even have to work hard at it anymore. Our entire process is to make people autonomous, and I'll say what my instructor said to me. If I'm doing my job right, you don't need me. I'll get you to a point of where you go from zero to formidable, where you are more capable now than most people at defending your life. And if that's all that you wanted, then your job here is done. For some people, they want to go from formidable to tactical. They want to go to the highest levels they possibly can with this. And the whole time that we're doing it, guys like yourself and Dustin and other people that we have, you're at a point where you're like, no, I don't I don't need you. You don't need me. We've made you autonomous and separate from our organization. And you don't have this brand loyalty. What Paul said to me, and I didn't fully understand it then, is the same thing I'm about to say now, is why we continue to be a tribe, why we continue to train and hang around with each other and invest our time and energy in sharing this process and weaponizing other people is nothing more than respect. It's respect for the process. It's respect for what the process has given us. It's respect for the people that so freely shared that with you. But there is no loyalty. That is why when I change what we are doing, when I change the strategy, when I change a tactic, when we change a tool, when we get rid of something and say, listen, we don't fucking do that anymore. Why? Because back then, to the best of our knowledge, that was the best thing to do. But we have learned from them. Something has told us. Criminals got smarter. Criminals got better. Something happened. And so we have to abandon that. There is nobody going, oh, fuck, are you fucking kidding me? That was the best part of my fucking game. And nobody's going, I love that shit. Like, that's what I want to do. That's what makes me, every time I come, that's all I care about doing. And now you're telling me we're never going to do that again? Fuck this shit. I quit. Because we don't have that loyalty like that. We don't have that. That doesn't even register for us. We're just excited to go, hey, good catch. Thank God somebody, shit was blood tested. Somebody had to die. Somebody had to fail for us to figure out that we need to change something. So we honor that shit and we fucking change. And again, it's the respect, not loyalty, you know what I mean? Not brand loyalty, not blind loyalty, not bias. Okay, so anyways, I thought that was an interesting conversation that we could have, and I hope people find some value in this and see how, again, if you're conditioned and have a bias, that experience can get you killed when it comes to protecting against violence. So I don't know, Brad, is there anything you want to add to clarify or wrap up?
Yeah, I don't think so. If I add anything, it'll probably just lead us onto a tangent.
Lord knows we can go there easy enough, right? So
Exactly.
okay, all right. Well, we'll wrap up here for tonight. Dustin was on vacation. He's leaving tonight, so we wish him a great vacation, a well-deserved vacation. Hope he enjoys it and safe travels. And for everybody that's listening and watching, thank you so much. We deeply appreciate this. Again, how we are growing our message and spreading our message is by people sharing. It's all organic. I'm not putting any paid ads into anything that we do because, again, we are looking for, we just want to we're trying to document and we are trying to contribute and build a base of knowledge that is accessible for people that want to learn how to protect themselves in this crazy world we live in. They want to understand violence. They want to understand themselves better, awaken their inner warrior, become, master the tool of violence, become the man you're meant to be, and become the family the protector your family needs you to be. This is our mission. So if you know anybody that can benefit from this, please tag us, post us, share this, forward it on to them. Don't forget to follow us on both Facebook at Awaken the Protector Within or on YouTube now where we're streaming live every Thursday on our podcast. Follow us there as well. Give us a follow, Awaken the Protector Within. And we just deeply appreciate it. So don't forget to head over, check out our website. We have a lot of free offerings there, a lot of programs that you can check out. So, all right, everybody, that's it. We'll be back again next week. Thanks, Brad. I appreciate you. And we'll see you guys soon. Stay safe, stay weaponized. Chat again soon, everybody.